There's a bright golden haze on the meadow. There's a bright golden haze on the meadow. Oh, wait, guys, sorry, wrong musical about a cowboy. Hello, everybody. I am Mackenzie, your co-artistic producer here at Cup of Hemlock Theatre, and we are back with our new episode, Pride Month themed, for the Cup Reviews. And today we are tackling none other than Brokeback Mountain, the opera. Yes, another show about singing cowboys. Yes, this is very much the anti-Oklahoma, I can say. In more ways than one. Yeah. And joining me for this panel, we got some wonderful familiar faces. Of course, we have returning is Patrick Teed. Hello, Patrick.
Hello. It's great to be back.
Yes. Yes, after your appearance on our most recent review of Streetcar Named Desire.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, so what's in your cup today? What have you been up to since we last saw you?
Yeah. In my cup
Who's your cat?
My cup is a can, apple bubbly. I don't know if people have tried this. I did not know this existed until like a week ago, but it is absolutely the best of all of the bubblies by far. Highly recommend. The cat she's a Sphinx cat, and her name is Lucille Bald. You might see her bald with the D. You might see her climb up on me at some point. And yeah, what have I been up to? Actually, this is gonna the guests work really well. This is gonna feed into each other. But I've been directing Carly Billings in her one-woman show for the Hamilton Fringe, so that'll be going up end of July. So between that and finishing my dissertation proposal, those have been my big things currently on the go.
That'll keep you pretty busy. Busy. And of course, a perfect segue over to Miss Carly Billings, who also just appeared in our Streetcar Named Desire panel. Carly, welcome back. Give us the rundown. What have you been up to? What is in your cup today?
Woo! Thanks for having me back as well. What a party. My cup is a bottle, but it's still a cup in my heart and brain. It's just full of water because I'm severely dehydrated in this hot Pride Month heat. So that's what I've got going. And yeah, as Patrick mentioned, what I've also got going professionally is our show. It's called Meatless Loaf, and it's coming to the Hamilton Fringe July 20th to 31st.
Woo!
Work on that. Yeah. But glad to be here. Take a little break.
Yes.
Mama needs a break. This is great.
Love it. And of course, I have my other co-artistic producer, Mr. Ryan Borochovitz, and very appropriately rocking the flannel today.
Yes.
Hello, Ryan.
Hello. Yes, I made sure to have something cowboy chic on. It is the most and only cowboy-ish shirt I own, so seemed appropriate. I sadly do not have the hat.
Darn it.
Oh, well. Yeah, happy to be here in my cup. Oh, hey, it's the Cup. Look at that. That's the show we're on right now. I am drinking water, because yes, agreed about the heat. But I have it in a nice mug.
Love it. And tonight I am drinking some Crystal Light strawberry raspberry lemonade. So there we go to that one. And tonight I'm just rocking a golf shirt because I felt it was very black and formal, very kind of rustic on the mountains look. So yeah, so that is the look today. And of course, we will now be diving into this piece. It came out in 2014. Directed by Ivo van Hove, who was most recently known on Broadway for his production of West Side Story that very much divided audiences and critics. So one of these days we'll have to do a sidebar conversation about that one. And then this was composed by Charles Wuorinen. We apologize for butchering your last name, sir. And the libretto was done by Annie Proulx.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yes, and she also wrote the short story that this opera is based off of. So, Ryan, why don't you give us a quick plot summary of this musical, for anybody who doesn't quite know it?
Oh, you want me to do that, eh?
Yes. I think you are always so succinct on this. I think you've learned that right.
All right. Well, we'll get more into this in a bit, but I've actually never read the short story nor seen the very famous Ang Lee movie that is based on this. Yes, which I was planning on watching it in the lead up to this panel, but I have had way too much on my plate and just did not find the time for it. So, short version, two cowboys that Jack and Ennis, they fall in love on a mountain called Brokeback. Thus the title. Yeah, they're hired to shoot wolves and coyotes to protect sheep. They have this lovely summer together where they fall in love and whatnot. But then they kind of go their separate ways. They both get married to 2 women, key detail. And yeah, try to have this very long romantic affair over many years. Are we doing spoilers in this description, Mac?
Yes.
One of them dies. Jack dies. Oh no, sad.
In a very dramatic way, a tire blows up in his face and he drowns in blood.
At least that's how it is stated. So, yes.
It's also part of the short story as well. That's how he dies, too.
Yes. Okay. Spoilers for all versions of the story. Yeah. So, Ennis has to, grapple with his grief at the very end, and he tries to take the ashes back to Brokeback Mountain. But oh no, can he? I'll leave that on a question mark.
Dun, dun, dun.
That's as good as a succinct summary as you're going to get out of me.
Love it. And then, so Carly, you kick us off for this category of which character do you think was the best performed of the night, of the show?
Sure. Well, the character we saw the most of, who went through the, arguably most dynamic journey, emotional journey, is Ennis Delmar. And so I think Daniel Okulitch did a great job. But my actual number 1 pick, someone who, when they came on stage, hit me, I was like, oh, I know exactly who this person is, was John Twist, played by Ryan McPherson, who was the dad of Jack's dad. And also Jack's mother, Jane Henschel. She was very scary.
Those eyes are very
enjoyed that. Very scary, very scary. I really enjoyed that duo very, very much. Yeah,
cool.
They injected a lot of life right at the end.
Mac, mind if I piggyback right on
Piggyback away, sir.
Carly, you picked all 3, my first choice and my 2 backups. No, I think that's a great testament to these performers. Yeah, Daniel Okulitch, definitely kind of, obviously he's the character who goes through the biggest journey. We spend the most time with him. And yeah, I thought he really was this great grounding presence. He played the brooding very well, but also kind of showed the sensitive emotional side that we definitely get to see as the plot unfolds. So yeah, definitely, and just very strong singer. Of course, hey, this is an opera, lots of singing. But then yeah, as a backup, if somebody was going to pick him before I had a chance, I was going to say Jack's 2 parents, John Twist Sr. and Mrs. Twist, as she's called in the credits. She doesn't get a first name, but yes, played by Ryan McPherson and Jane Henschel, because I think it's interesting that we hear a lot about the father before we get to finally meet him. We hear that he's abusive, that he's this tough man who, tried to harden his son, and he, was very abusive and beat him until Jack was finally old enough to fight back. So then when we finally see him, at this point, he's old, he walks with canes, he's disabled, yet he still has that harsh gruffness. He's yelling at Ennis, who's trying to come to retrieve the ashes. So it's this kind of just very interesting embodiment of this character that we've only heard about and kind of manifested through absence, that I thought was just very well done by this performer. He's not on stage for very long, but he really does meet and surpass the expectations that we've already had for him. And then, of course, the mother, too, Mrs. Twist. She was just such a I agree. There was something, she was scary, but not in the same way that the father was, which was interesting. You kind of get this very interesting window into who Jack is, where he comes from, why he ended up the way he is, in many respects that we can perhaps unpack further just from meeting these 2 people after he's no longer here to give testament to his own identity. We finally get this back channel window into, oh, okay, this is what you grew up with. And I thought both of these performers really did make that. So yes, great job, all 3 of them.
Awesome. Patrick?
Yeah, I actually, it's funny, listening to you 2 speak, I was thinking the last 10 minutes of the show to me was so much stronger actually than the entire rest of the opera. And I'm probably had a lot to do with the presence of the parents and the strength of those performances. But I'll just throw say some new names, just to throw new names out there. The first is It's a performance that I thought I hated at first, and then I grew to like it. And that was Heather Buck's Alma Beers. When we were first introduced to her, I was like, which is Alma is the wife of Ennis. And when we were first introduced to her, she was like whiny and naive, and her voice was just grating. And then I started to realize, oh, that's in part the score. She's been dealt a bad hand.
We will get into the score.
And then I also continued to realize, like, oh, that naivety really is a part of an arc she builds, where she really goes from this like naive, excited, soon-to-be wife to this, despondent, lost woman who has just lost the primary years of her life to a loveless marriage. So I thought she gave a good arc. And then in that first scene that we're introduced to her, the woman that I thought totally stole the scene and I wanted more of her was Saleswoman. Her name is just Saleswoman. She's played by Letitia Singleton. She just has this one scene where she's trying to convince Alma's mom to buy the most expensive dress for her daughter, so she gets the biggest, payout. Commission. And commission. And it was great. She was fantastic. She made the horrible music of that scene entertaining. So,
hashtag justice for Saleswoman.
Yeah, justice for
Saleswoman.
She did the most with the least.
It's true.
We love to see it.
Yeah,
it's true. For me, my choice also was Daniel Okulitch as Ennis Delmar. I mean, I actually looked up some of the backing of this show, and even the composer was very intent on making him the core connection of the show that audiences had to connect with. The whole score is written around his journey, where in the early parts of the opera, a lot of his stuff is half sung, half spoken text. And then in the second act, in particular, he develops his singing lines as he discovers more of his true self, gets out of his marriage, and almost gets to be with Jack, and then doesn't. And he has a big soliloquy at the end. Does he get the ashes? Who knows? You got to watch and sit through the opera like we had to find out. I've sat through it twice.
We didn't have to. We chose to. We could have done this episode on anything.
It's true. Mind you, this was on our watch list for a long time just by the title alone. So we kind of backed ourselves into a corner on it. But yeah, I mean, it's a choice. Anyway, but yeah, so I mean, this whole piece is written around his character arc, character growth, and that right there enough is like, clearly he had the most to work with, which really helped him be the one character you can kind of go, okay, I get your journey. I mean, the fact we hear the whole backstory of his dad took him to see the dead body of the other gay couple rancher that lived in town as well, that died in the drainage ditch. Very poignant moment of the story. Very cements a lot of why Ennis is the way he is. So
is it Ennis or Ennis? I feel like we're going to go back and forth through this whole
I think
time.
It's Ennis.
I think it's Ennis.
I feel like they sung Ennis many times. I've always heard people with that name spelled that way pronounce it Ennis. So I don't know.
Because I think in the movie, I'm quite sure they say Ennis.
Ennis, and he's Heath Ledger, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool.
And an incredible performance. Yeah.
Very. It should have won Best Picture, that movie, I will say.
I can't comment. We'll talk more about that later.
Yes. All right. So next is, what was your favorite production or design element? Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, it was an opera, so there was clearly a lot of money put into technical design, so that was at times engaging. And I really liked the videography and the video design. I felt like the especially in the beginning of the show, the kind of staging where it's just this open, empty space with this video design in the back that shows us the mountain, shows us the sheep, and it's just Ennis, Jack, and this kind of scenic video scene. I thought that was gorgeous and incredibly stark, and really effectively evoked the kind of emptiness and fullness of that space simultaneously, and really was able to I mean, in a better production would have really helped us, I think, hone in on the intimacy and the magnificence of the space.
Yes.
But the score just couldn't do it. But the scenic design, the video, the video designs, they really were incredible, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sorry, Mac, mind if I piggyback off this
Piggyback
too?
away.
It's not so much because I want to say the same answer again, but I will agree mine kind of dovetails off of this very nicely because my pick is the lighting and specifically how it did play with this this videography and the projection. Because especially right from the very first moment when we see Aguirre, his name was, their boss, kind of come right on stage in pure silhouette along this backdrop. And of course, the cowboy form and the hat in particular is just such a striking image as a silhouette. And yeah, throughout the entire piece, especially in that whole first act where we are among this natural backdrop, I thought the lighting and shadows and the campfires, especially when they first consummate their relationship physically through the tent, was very well done. I kind of felt like it slipped a bit in the later acts when we were sort of in the real world, very kitchen sink drama, which maybe kind of, and I have mixed feelings about this. I'll talk about it now. It's not really what I plan on talking about for the weakest element, but I will kind of just say, I don't know, and you could listen to my Warhorse rant in that other episode if you want to hear more about this, but I always have mixed feelings when technology is used to evoke nature. And I find the projection is such an interesting dissonance in that too, because that's supposed to be the wide open landscape, and yet we need this projection to sort of manifest it properly. And then when we get into the stifling confines of modern life outside of the mountain, it's a lot more natural because it actually is just, well, this is a real set. It's not the sometimes pixelated depending on, well, of course we're watching this through a pro shot, so maybe that didn't help either, but yeah, so I kind of just think the lighting is maybe what sold it for me more than the projection itself. But overall, I think, yeah, like you said, Patrick, the production design, they had a lot of money to spend and it shows.
Yeah. I'll piggyback off both of you because I had the set, because of how it wonderfully thematically enhanced the story. Like the first scenes are in the mountains, it's open, it's wide, but then you have these very intimate scenes like the one behind me around the campfire. Then of course you have the infamous tent scene where it's all done in beautiful silhouette, and then you get to the domesticity stagings, and of course the set feels claustrophobic because they don't fit into that world. So I like that. And then once Jack is tragically gone, the back flies open, and then it's just this empty black void. Like the whole scene with the parents at the end is in the black because it's this empty black hole that Ennis is living in. So I thought that was very well done. I thought the productions and set design were clearly the strongest element. And I mean, when I couldn't listen to the music at certain points because I just got so annoyed by it, at least I had some nice backgrounds to look at, and I went, okay, all right, at least I got some nice mountains to go through. I mean, the whole opening montage-y thing actually reminded me a little bit of Robert Wise's direction of the opening of Sound of Music, where you careen through the hills of Austria there over the Alps before you find Maria on the hilltop. And I went, oh, you're kind of going the same route here. Like you're capturing and showing the importance of nature to this story. So it all worked. Carly, what's yours?
Yeah, I would say for about the first half, I would agree that the set was super strong. It was, big and small, and all the beautiful things in between. But once you got into the like real world kitchen drama moments, it's not like I get the like fish out of water kind of thing, but it was ugly. Like I can't forgive ugly. Sometimes I can, but it just was not. It didn't do anything. It just took away from me. But what was beautiful the whole time, those cowboy hats. Come on, wardrobe.
Yeah.
Wardrobe was really giving us, cowboy fantasy through and through. Also, like because it's a period piece, right? It's set in the 60s through the 80s. Like it's a long span, and like the little fashions changed, but it was also interesting to see who did or didn't change along the way. It was pretty well marked. I thought the costumes were great.
I will say the one costume that didn't work for me was the one of the smoker dad, the one that Jack marries, like like his big
the rich man.
Beard. Yeah, the ranch man who's like coughing and wheezing the whole time, and he had this awful fake gray beard that just looked like he came out of like a party store. I was like,
it looked to me like it was his real beard that they just colored weird.
Okay,
Like,
either
that's
way,
what
it
it
did
gave
not
me.
look good.
Yeah.
At
It did not
first, I
look good.
thought he was the same actor that played Aguirre. I don't believe he was.
He wasn't. No.
Yeah,
Different actor.
but
Mhm.
the beard kind of made me think like, oh, did they just like baby powder him backstage? And
That was also how I started putting together this production had money to burn. Like so many actors that literally
So
are
many
just
minor
there for
characters.
5 seconds. And it's like you really could have people do multiple things,
Yeah.
but you're just not. Like
yeah.
Choices. We love choices.
Yeah. Okay. Weakest part of the production. I want to go first for this.
Please do.
Because I have it's the musical choice to write this piece in a tonal modernism style. It was the worst wrong choice for this piece. It didn't add, it hindered my experience watching. I watched this thing twice because I was so jarred the first time. I was like, maybe I'll get it the second time. No. The music, listening to the score for this just made, and I even listened to it at work on YouTube, just the soundtrack alone, to try and listen to some stuff. And I just went, no, just take the music in and just write this as a freaking play. It doesn't work. Like, it's distracting, and because it lacked any type of melodic structure, it didn't aid the story in telling the story of these two men out of space at a time, fighting against the heteronormative conventions that they're in. Like if it had been atonal all the way through, at the very end, Ennis's last soliloquy was like the Puccini style classic opera soliloquy that shows he's come to peace and he's moving forward, then I would have accepted all the atonal crap. But the whole piece was that way, and I just went, oh no, like go watch Les Mis and you watch some of the book scenes, like a Fontaine's Arrest, where like all those scenes have melodic ways of turning basic text into heightened music singing. This just didn't do it. It missed its mark, and the story is so easily set up to be a classic sweeping romantic opera. Like, it's kind of a very generic story. We'll get more into this later on, why it was made into an opera. But it's like it's a very generic based story. Like, the characters, except for Ennis, don't have a lot of development to them. There's a lot of minor side characters that show up. You could have done a lot more to make it a more classic opera, and it would have worked way better. I mean, I think they went out of their way because of like something like an Oklahoma, where it's like such a classic musical cowboy story. They're like, we got to go the anti-Oklahoma. We got to go the anti-Puccini. So we're going to write the most atonal thing in the world. And I mean, looking at the orchestra, I'm like, I didn't hear any of those instruments. It was just all low bass grinding notes. And I just went, I mean, the only thing I will say is I commend the actors for singing the score, because singing atonally is one of the most difficult things you will ever have to do.
For like 2 hours.
For 2 hours. Like, they earned that standing O just for trying to get through this bloody score. I full on commend them for that. It was just, Charles, I get that you were wanting to go the anti-Puccini route. You said it in your write-up you did of this. I get it. I just think you totally went the wrong direction. That I think Annie should have just written a play adaptation of her short story and just stuck with that, because the music did not enhance the piece. It made me never go back to this piece again. Patrick, as a fellow musician who has like perfect pitch and stuff and can sing gorgeously, who I think would be great in Oklahoma the musical. Patrick, what did you think?
I would love to be in Oklahoma musical. Yeah. Also, I have relative pitch, not perfect pitch, but thank you. I wish I had perfect pitch. Anyway, but for me it was like there were a lot of things for me that didn't work in this production, but I think if I kept paring it down, it comes down to the score. And like, I totally get that the guy who wrote the score, again, Wuorinen, anyway, like, I get that his thing is experimental music. Like, he's like a Pulitzer Prize winning composer who does like experimental opera, and like that's his shtick, and like that's cool. But like you said, like I think there's stories that are enhanced by atonality and stories that are pulled back by it, and stories that you can do a mix. And I too kept waiting for moments of melody to emerge or recur, or moments of possible harmony that then could have made the friction of atonality really interesting. And I think there actually were so many opportunities for him to play with atonality in a way that would have been really intelligent to speak to the multiple levels of unsettling relation that is happening in this piece.
It would have been great to have a duet between the two wives as their marriages are breaking down and having some counterpoint singing, like R.I.P. Sondheim, who wrote a lot of stuff that is very, maybe not atonal, but non-melodic, but still.
Yeah, and certainly deeply contrapuntal. But I was really unsettled by this score, and not in a useful or interesting way. In a way that I kept going, why is this what's happening? Why is this what's happening? And then again, even just choices about where things are pitched. Like the poor woman playing fucking like Ennis's wife. Like her, all she was doing was like coloratura, like skrelting essentially.
Skrelting.
Like this poor woman. Like what does that do? Why is that placed there? So yeah, like I value experiment, and I love composers that are willing to try new things, but this experiment certainly failed, and I don't know how it got to this point with them not realizing that this experiment failed. And like you say, just there are so many different ways this could have been musically written that would have enhanced the story, and I think that's what like hurt the most about it, was watching going, this is such a good idea. And then this is how that idea has been actualized. Yeah.
I would love to see just another version or another opera or musical written of this piece, because I think the story is beautiful. It's just the music choice butchered. Like, it was a whiff. It was a swing and a miss by a mile. It wasn't even close to the plate. You missed that sheep herding by, like, the sheep are gone off the cliff. Like, they are not there. You missed that coyote. You shot and you missed. Like, God bless you. No. Ryan?
So I will be the first to say I'm not very musically literate. So while I did not enjoy the music, I decided that's not going to be the thing I talk about here, and I figured it would be covered, so it was safe to leave that unturned. One thing, just another thing that I kind of, maybe not the weakest element, but something that kind of irked me in this, and perhaps maybe this will come up more when we talk more about the piece as adaptation. If all of you have seen the movie and or read the short story, I'd maybe like to hear more of your thoughts on this. But the framing of Jack's death was, in my mind, not very well executed.
Same thing in the movie.
So, okay, switch, if it is in the movie, at least it's in that sense trying to be faithful to that, and maybe I can give it more points for that. Not that fidelity is necessary, but I can maybe understand why it is, especially knowing that Proulx wrote the libretto for this. But to me, it feels very abrupt when we just find out about it. There was kind of like not musically, not structurally build up to it, or very little. To me, it was unclear how exactly Ennis first found out. He was like reading the letter, but did we ever find out from who? And then he calls Jack's wife, and she recounts the story, I'll say in big quotation marks. But then, so we're presented with the story about it was a freak accident, that a tire iron hit him in the face, and he drowned in his own blood.
No. The tire didn't hit him.
Oh,
he was blowing up a tire.
Okay.
And
right.
the tire literally blew up in his face. It's a very graphic, random death.
Yeah.
Where were you going with this?
Well, my thinking, like, I know where she's going with it. Obviously, that's not what happened. He was murdered, just like Earl was murdered.
Yes.
We know this, obviously, but it would have been nice if the text confirmed that suspicion. Like, and I don't know, in the film, I can
The film does.
Yes, I see. Having not seen the film, I suspected that even while, like, if I were the filmmaker of this, like, if I were Ang Lee, I would picture that we maybe have this phone conversation, and then intercut through it, we see what actually happened.
This is basically exactly what he does.
Ang Lee, you and me, same page. Yes, because I think, yes, we can jump to that conclusion without needing to see it, but it's kind of, I think, nice and assuring for the audience to get that confirmation, because otherwise I think some people might leave the theater thinking like, oh, what a freak accident. Isn't it a shame that their love could never truly be realized in a final state. But like that to me seems to undercut the homophobia that is the obvious obstacle throughout the entire plot. And, I would have just liked to, one, have like a better framing and build up of this reveal that actually makes it the gut punch that I think it should be, because it really wasn't. It was kind of just like, what the fuck? Okay.
I was actually thinking that by the time we arrived at that scene, because obviously I knew that was going to happen, I thought maybe like the music, it would no longer be sung. Like I thought I was like, there's all kinds of things they have to do in order to draw attention to this in a way that like merits, exactly, the centrality of it to the narrative. But yeah, like no.
And we have such a long denouement. Like I kept kind of waiting for the moment where they stage what actually happened, or at least described it. Near the very end in that final soliloquy, Ennis kind of says like Earl. So you can kind of, if you hadn't connected the dots already, you could sort of maybe do it from that, but also just like Earl, he died. You don't necessarily get to this conclusion. And I'll also say, I knew just through pop culture osmosis that this story is, two cowboys fall in love, one of them dies, but I actually didn't know which of the two dies. So I'm watching this knowing that, one of them is going to die, but I wasn't sure which one based on kind of all of Ennis's brooding. I kind of expected it was going to be him. Yeah. And so not only finding out that, oh, it's Jack, but finding out in what I thought was the most anticlimactic way. Yeah, it just really didn't do it for me.
Yeah. But they could have even staged it kind of like where between their conversation, there's like a silhouetted recreation of that moment. Like go back to the shadow play.
They did such great shadow work.
Something more interesting besides the two actors singing atonally through a phone to each other.
Yeah.
And like in this director's other work, he's not afraid of representing violence. Like he does not shy away from
that's blood,
brutal violence on stage.
Yeah. So. Carly?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all y'all. Y'all took my two, really. Like the whole show was at like 7, 7, 7, 9, 7, 7. Like it's like there was no like valleys and peaks, musically, but also.
And how you sang that is also the way it was.
Yeah. Sculpting. Imagine that the whole show for everyone, especially the women. But also just like a little bit like unhinged the whole time, but nothing to ground any of that unhingedness. So you don't necessarily know what moments are the most unhinged. I felt, knowing the story and knowing, what I came into it with, I figured it out obviously. But yeah, like a little bit more, like what if we had a taste of melody? Wouldn't that have been nice? Wouldn't that have been like wholesome and loving? Like wouldn't that have been more devastating when one of them dies instead of like, now I have one less person to listen to, thank God. Brutally, I wanted like a nice moment of relief, and I never got it.
Yeah.
And that has to do with, all the things we've just talked about. So,
yes.
Agreed.
Yeah. All right. Now to the next question. Would we recommend this? Ryan, since you're on this panel, we're going to start with you. Would you put this on a syllabus in adaptation theory class?
Okay, so I will get to that in a second. Obviously, I did not love this piece, but I would recommend it because at the end of the day, I think this is just a fascinating cultural artifact that, it's just neat that this exists, honestly. And I kind of want people to at least, if not necessarily see it, at least know about it and kind of, hey, listen to this episode and kind of like understand, was it a failure? Yeah. In my opinion, yes. And I don't really love disliking things. I try to find the positives in everything. And I like that we did start with our little compliment sandwich at the beginning. But I still think that it's worth just experiencing this and thinking like, yep, this is a thing that exists. And we can, in the next section, we'll probably unpack more reasons why I think it's so interesting. And that maybe leads nicely into, would I put this on a syllabus? For an adaptation theory course, yeah, that would be probably the one context in which I think I wouldn't put it on like an opera course, because like what a strange, not very good opera this is. And I wouldn't be teaching an opera course probably, but
come on, I think you'd be a great opera teacher.
But yeah, we'll talk more about adaptation stuff in the next section, so I will maybe refrain from getting into what I might talk about in that lesson of adaptation. And it wouldn't necessarily be like an adaptation playwriting course where like watch this so you know what not to do. But like, you know, we do kind of look at these things as this is, you know, responding to a piece of literature, and more pointedly, probably the film itself. We have an interesting case where the original author came back and did the libretto. We have, well, in my opinion, while I do think there definitely could have been a good version of this as an opera, I also think not everything needs to be an opera/musical. Like, I absolutely hated Room that they just did, like, at Mirvish. I don't know if any of you saw it, but... And that was
after your review of it, I did not.
Yeah, but yeah, I did not care for that. And yeah, maybe not everything needs to be a musical, but doesn't mean that a good version couldn't have been done. But yeah, this one, while it didn't hit the mark, hey, isn't it cool that it still kind of exists though with the budget it has? They really did go all out, so you know, throw them a bone and at least give it some moment of your time. Oh, but last point. Watch it with subtitles. I don't know if the four of you...
I watched it with subtitles. I couldn't watch it without subtitles.
Well, I watched 5 minutes of it without subtitles, and I'm like, I wasn't even confident that they were singing in English until I went back with subtitles. Like, okay, that's not what I thought they were saying. You know, I've been to the opera before. I love, you know, when an opera is in like Italian or German, seeing it with the subtitles is important, or surtitles is important, because yeah, it is part of, you know, your capacity to follow along with the story. But especially for English operas, I find operatic language is just so alienating as it is, that if you do want to be able to follow the story, I think it is important to have those surtitles, even if it's in your mother tongue. Yeah. So there we go. Someone else talk.
Yeah. Carly?
Yeah, did I really enjoy myself? Sure. Did I think it was good? No. Would I recommend it? Yeah, because it reminded me that opera is alive, baby. Opera is doing its opera thing, and ain't that good for all of us? Whether or not it's well, you know, alive and well. Alive, is it well? No one asked, so that's fine. I was like, remember opera? So it was really good to me to just, you know, see something weird, something that we didn't ask for, but something that we're like, isn't that nice? That's the thing. Kind of like Ryan said, isn't that nice that can be something someone can watch and hooray for that. So, yeah, and also sometimes it's just neat to see money at work. You know?
Those subscriber bases are strong.
Like, on the flip side of that, though, like, I wonder how many people we could have fed and housed with the budget of this piece.
That's always...
But, like, when the piece is good, I can kind of overlook that. But, okay, I'm undercutting my own point here. Go see it, everyone.
Yeah. No, that's always definitely in the back of my mind. Like, this is what we're putting money into. All right. But we love having choices. No, I just also like, I was like, contemporary opera, modern opera, that's so fun and cool. Reminder that exists, because opera is so different from music theater. It's so different from all like other styles of theater. It's really its own lane, doing its own thing. And I love when things get a little weird, just to, you know, experiment a bit. That's what experimentation is. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. This didn't, but it worked out in that it's something to look at and listen to and be like, opera.
All right, Patrick.
Yeah, so I think I would have to say mostly a no. Just because, for the pure reason that I think it will, for most people, be an exercise in attention. And like listening to atonality, I think for most people for 2 hours is just, I don't know if that's something I could in good faith recommend to a lot of people, and that I would then expect them to come back to me for future recommendations. But that being said, I too, actually, I'm really glad I saw it. Like, even fully deeply disliking the piece. Because I am really interested in, experiment and like in attempts at something. I mean, the second I heard about Brokeback Mountain, the opera, I was like, that's brilliant. And then it was absolutely not what I thought it was going to be. And I do think it was bad, but I am also excited even by the fact that it was just absolutely not what I thought it was going to be. And I think piggybacking a bit off of what Carly said, I might say I would be curious to maybe force a lot of musical theater people to watch this, because I think there's a really interesting way that like opera for a long time has been thought of as a very conservative form. And I mean, it is a very conservative form and it still is a very conservative form. But there's actually a lot of really interesting stuff happening musically in opera right now. And I mean, this is actually symptomatic of that, right? The fact that there's like a 2-hour atonal piece. Whereas musical theater to me is actually become one of the most musically boring and dry areas of work. And I say this as a person that primarily works in musical theater. And I think there's a way that a lot of musical theater people contradistinguish themselves or contradistinguish the form to opera and assume opera is this conservative thing that it's actually worked very hard to push past. And so I would maybe say I would love more musical theater people to see this and stuff like this to realize that musical theater actually needs to do more interesting things. Because musical theater is bland as fuck right now. So that would be my maybe asterisk of people I would force to see it, even though I don't know that they'd like it.
Yeah. I mean, for me, there's a very small sliver of the pie chart of people I would actively promote this to. One of them being my fans of opera out there. I would recommend watching a modern opera piece if you haven't already. I would say anybody who is interested in more experimental works and is willing to sit through that, because I mean, not everybody wants to watch experimental things. Some people like the sit down and watch a Arthur Miller play or a Tennessee Williams. Some people much prefer to watch The Streetcar Named Desire. That it's a tried and true, well-tested piece that's proven to be a solid piece of work. Some people like that, knowing, hey, I'm going to pay $200 to go see a show. Where do I put my money? Do I put it toward Tennessee Williams and Streetcar, or do I put it toward Brokeback Mountain, the opera? I think a majority of people will probably go Tennessee Williams, Streetcar, because they go, at least I know what I'm going to get for my money. Like if I came and paid $200 to see this and I came into the theater, I would have been, I want a refund. I'm glad we saw this on Broadway HD, where I'm paying a monthly subscription and I get a whole bunch of other good stuff in there that kind of balances this one piece out that maybe didn't quite hit its mark. Like, would I show this to my parents? Hell no. My dad would look at this and go, this got taxpayer grant money from the government to make? What
from
is
the Spanish government? From the Spanish government.
From
not
the Spanish
his taxpayer
government.
money.
Yes, my dad would go, my dad would just go, this got funded by a government's tax dollars. Like, did nobody look at this and go, maybe not? Like, what's going on here? Like, I'm all for experimentation. Don't get me wrong. Like, devised theater was what I did at York. I'm all for trying new things and swinging for the fences, seeing what sticks. And sometimes you get something really beautiful. Like, people forget nobody had ever done Jesus Christ Superstar, the rock opera concept album, until Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice sat down and did it. And it actually took off. The Beatles' whole concept had never been done. I mean, we have a biopic about Elvis coming out, where we see the rise of Elvis. And we see that first concert he does in the trailer, where we see those hips move and the audience goes wild. And that's it, right? I mean, all art is experimental, and sometimes things hit and take off, and sometimes things flounder and burn out really quickly. And I mean, that's the joy of art. So I'm happy there is experimental pieces out there. Would I, in good faith, as Patrick said, recommend this piece to people who may not be keenly interested in something like this? Probably not. I'd probably just say go back and watch the really good film from 2005, that should have won Best Picture instead. That's probably a better adaptation of the short story. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think there's a very small margin of audience who I think would actively enjoy this. And I do think, I do agree with Patrick, musical theater people should watch this, because, I mean, we'll get more into opera in a bit, but Patrick's right. Opera does kind of get it's opera, it's Puccini, it's the fancy languages and all the big sets that get all the money from people. And It's the same music operas done over and over again. How many Madame Butterflies can be produced in the world? You know, that type of thing. So it is good to see a new take of an opera being done. And I do think that should be commended, first and foremost. Somebody tried something, didn't work, not really, but good on you for trying. That's the important thing. You tried something and didn't quite work. I mean, everybody forgets Sondheim in his lifetime. Not many of his shows when they came out were big hits. Sunday in the Park with George, specific overtures were kind of poo-pooed and kind of going, Sondheim, what are you doing? Like, stop it. Go away. We want Phantom of the Opera. You know? We want something more traditional. It's not till later on in his life that he gets the attention that he rightfully deserves for his canon of work, right? It's one of those things in their time may not always hit right away. Who knows? Maybe 25, 50 years down the road, somebody will come across this piece again and go, oh my goodness.
This was really onto something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You never
And we're
know.
going to look like fools.
Yes. Yeah, so
Absolutely.
What were these four people thinking?
Yeah.
So, but there we go. All right, let's get into some more play text-based questions. Carly, I'll let you start this first because I know Ryan's got a good adaptation answer theory. So we'll hold Ryan for a minute. But so the question is to you: how do you feel this opera works as an adaptation of the prior versions of the story, i.e., the Annie Proulx 1997 short story and the Ang Lee 2005 film? Or if you've never encountered either of these previous iterations, does watching this opera make you want to now read and/or see the film adaptation?
Sure. So what I have to draw on, I've never read the short story, but I have seen the film. Mm-hmm. I want to say off the bat that this as an idea, as a tragic opera, is kind of incredible. Like, this is the exact story that should be a tragic opera. I think the container, I think the form lends itself perfectly well to the story. It was just in the execution, I think it fell apart. Do I think that a tragic opera of Brokeback Mountain that maybe isn't this could be better than the Ang Lee film? Maybe. But have I seen that today? No. The movie, gave us depth. It gave us Anne Hathaway, but that's fine. That's fine.
I was like, for Carly, that's an insult, to be clear.
That's an insult.
I was like, that was a bad thing. That was a negative for Carly.
I'm an out-of-pocket Hatha hater. I don't mean to be. It's just who I am through and through. She's fine. She's great in Princess Diaries 1 and 2. But yeah, no, I think it's an incredible film. If someone was like, hey, would you like to read the story or watch the opera or watch the movie? I'd be like, I'll watch the movie again. Yeah, that would be my answer.
Yeah. Patrick?
Yeah, so I first saw the movie, and I've seen the movie many times. And then, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I want to say I read the short story mostly for lulz because the author, Annie Proulx, basically did an interview where she started complaining about people like fan fiction where Jack lives and they live happily ever after. And she's like, fuck that. This is my story.
What?
Jack dies. That's
her story is John Wayne fan fiction, gay fan fiction.
Oh, absolutely. But which is kind of what makes it made the response camp to me. So I was like, okay. So anyway, when I read this interview, I was like, I kind of stand Annie Proulx now. This is ridiculous and incredible. So I read the short story. It was good. But yeah. So all that to say, I've actually seen both, or read the one and seen the other. I think this is a bad adaptation of the short story. But I do think, and I actually would even say, not just absolutely what Carly said. I think an opera of Brokeback, and we'll talk about this more, I think, a little later. But that's a brilliant idea. But I even think using atonality is actually brilliant for the piece because so much of the piece is about relational friction. And you can communicate so much with atonality about friction, right? And fissures between people and just creating this kind of unsettling atmosphere. So I think, the idea, really brilliant. But yeah, in practice, just watch the movie. The movie is the best. I'm not even a superlative kind of person, but the movie really is just very well done.
Ryan?
Do you want to go first, Mac?
Sure, I'll go first.
Because I think I'm the only one who has not. I'm going to answer the second half of this question.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So for me, I saw the 2005 film my aunt was the one that showed it to me because she lives out in Calgary, Alberta. Yes. And so the film was shot out there. There were many shots of the mountains that were done out in Alberta. So that was very big to her. So the summer I went to visit her, this was one of the movies we rented because she wanted to show off, hey, Alberta filmed the movie. And it was Brokeback Mountain, you know? And then I watched Crash, which I was like, how did this ever win Best Picture? It should have been Brokeback Mountain by a mountaintop. Like, leaps and bounds, Brokeback Mountain was the better film that year, and somehow Crash won. Don't know how that's possible. But yeah, no, I would definitely. Yes, Carly.
Just something I just remembered is that the person who showed me this movie was none other than Patrick Keaton. I watched it for the first time with Patrick.
Yes.
So,
oh my
just
god.
wanted to
Yeah.
put that out
Yeah.
there.
That's
Yeah.
fun.
I love that.
First year in my like tiny single dorm room, we
Yeah.
piled like 6 of us in there and just watched it.
Yeah.
So,
and like we all wept.
That was a recovered memory.
Yeah,
we
yeah,
wept,
yeah.
and then we were like,
Yeah.
hooray. I think we got
Yeah.
a noise complaint because we were crying so badly. Anyway, sorry for that interjection. But
No, I love that. But yeah, no, I definitely would say the film is the best adaptation. I mean, I will give Ms. Annie Proulx. I will give her credit because, I mean, the opera does hit all the plot points. Like, she did not cut a plot point out, except for the very end. There's one plot point that is different. The film has the daughter of Ennis coming back, and they cut that. And I'm like, that I'm okay with, because it's a stronger ending to have Ennis come to this emotional resolution and close the curtain. Because I don't know if I could take another 10-minute denouement of more atonal singing. So, yeah, I definitely will say the film is my preferred choice. Yeah, like, definitely, as Patrick and Carly said, the concept of Brokeback Mountain the opera sounds good on paper. It's just, once again, the choice of atonality wasn't executed right. I mean, go back to a lot of other pieces that use atonality. You needed more to that. It needed to be more than just atonality. It had to be mix of atonality and something else. Like, have what's his name, Leather Cowboy in the opening, come out, sing melodically in the mountains, and then have your two lovers come out and atonality appears in the second, because they're off center, they're off axis with each other. Mm-hmm. They're not mixing. Then post tent scene, they have a beautiful romantic harmony to each other. That then goes back to atonality during the fight scene, where like they break up, and then we jump 4 years later, and the atonality's gotten worse because their lives are spinning out of control. You know, some more dramaturgy should have been done to this atonality. But on paper, Brokeback Mountain the opera does. We will get more into that in the next question. But Ryan, let's hear you with your adaptation.
Yeah, I'm actually going to save most of that again, because having not encountered the previous versions, I don't feel qualified to, like, to some extent, speak about it as adaptation. Like, obviously, an adaptation can stand alone, and it doesn't. But I think part of thinking of something as adaptation means applying this comparative lens to it that I am not really in a position to do. And like I said, I really did want to at least watch the movie in the lead up to this, but what a week this has been. So unfortunately wasn't. But to answer the second part of this question that I wrote,
almost like you planned it that way.
I really want to see the movie now. And specifically, thank you for confirming my suspicion about the thing I didn't like with the climax of this. Yeah, the movie knows, as I understand it based on your descriptions, knows what the story is trying to do better than I think this version does. Or at least maybe this version is trying to trust its audience to connect certain dots without. But I think there is a very specific rhetoric to cinema that maybe is harder to translate on the stage, but maybe in opera in particular, that allows for those kinds of cut scenes that you can have simultaneous staging on stage that would have maybe manifest that, and I think would have done a fine job, especially like the silhouettes that we were proposing could have. But yeah, I think I really want to see a better version of this story. And because this is something that, like I said, I know I know it through cultural osmosis. I can picture so many images from this movie I haven't seen. I've seen the poster. I love both of the actors. I've seen them in so many other things, and yet this is one of the things that they're both best known for. And it's kind of interesting that my first encounter with the story, and thus far only, is with this opera. So yes, when I have a minute, I will watch the movie. I might even want to read the short story. If Patrick has your seal of approval, I'm inclined. My thoughts about it as adaptation will kind of be more about just Brokeback as opera in general, so we'll come to that in the next question.
All right. Well, let's dive into the next question then, which is, why do you think this stage version was done as an opera? Did you find that the operatic form helped or hindered the narrative? Patrick.
Yeah, so I think, in some ways, I think theoretically, and I guess really this is I guess what we should be talking about at this point, right? Brokeback as opera. I think the operatic form absolutely helps the narrative of Brokeback, or offers like a different register that we can kind of attend to the story through, particularly because of, these are really these are like quiet men, right? And they're men who aren't used to articulating how they feel. Certainly like are working through libidinal subconscious registers a lot of the time that they are like literally working through, and we're watching them work through it. And something that music can provide is a kind of non-textual register to explore things that can't be said, or are being or are pressed under pressure, or kind of subconscious registers. And so I think obviously it's a grandiose love story, like that's like Romeo and Juliet-esque. That really lends itself to the operatic form just narratively, but even in terms of these characters, what opera could have done to enhance the storytelling and enhance our ability to enter into their own arcs, I think could have been like actually incredibly brilliant. So much is done. I mean, like Ryan was saying earlier, like film has a particular rhetoric to it, and like so much in the film that was worked with, right, was image, and like the subtleties of image, because again, there's like these men aren't really saying how they're feeling, or sometimes Jack is saying how he's feeling, but even Jack is often like figuring out how he's feeling, right? And so I think music could have been a really cool angle and a really interesting angle to give us insight into these men and also their wives, actually. But yeah, it just didn't quite do it. But as an idea, the grandness of the narrative, the star-crossed loversness, the things music could have given us access to, I think are all brilliant and could have really enhanced the story that Brokeback tells.
Yeah. Ryan?
So this is interesting for me because I think we're all kind of on the same page that this story feels like it should be so conducive to opera, and it is brilliant to do it. But I kind of, in the back of my head, I also have the voice of I feel like most people, like I could be wrong, we're all in this room very like progressive, young folks who kind of course this makes sense. But I feel like a lot of certainly older, maybe opera buffs would look at this concept and be like, Brokeback, an opera? That's pop culture. That's like like this kind of stuffy, more conservative opera connoisseur who would be like, what is that? And to me, like, the thing that this makes me think about is, I think it was around 2005, there was Jerry Springer, the opera. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this. But
Yes.
Yeah, but that, I think, is such an interesting concept because it is taking what we consider to be the epitome of trash TV and putting it in this operatic form. Whether it was successful or not is a different story, but putting it in this operatic form to create a piece of high art out of what we consider to be the lowest of the low. And when you think about Jerry Springer as a concept, like, well, so much of opera and, mythology and this kind of cultural stories are about crises of parentage and lineage and understanding like who you are. And like, this is the contemporary version of that. So why aren't we putting it in the form that those stories are so often told? It's like a very interesting idea. And it's, it also makes me think of the play Mr. Burns, a post-electric play by Anne Washburn. I don't know those of you who are familiar with it, yes. But it's set in a post-apocalyptic world where there's no electricity, and it shows the evolution of pop culture being transposed into high art over time thereafter, and it's specifically through the lens of The Simpsons, and specifically the Simpsons episode Cape Fear, which starts in the beginning of the apocalypse as just people telling stories around a campfire. And then after that, we get like 20 years later or so, we're seeing like medieval mystery play pageant wagons where people are performing, like kind of the sort of dawn of theater being reconstituted in this post-electricity world by reanimating episodes of The Simpsons. And then like 100 years after that, in the final act, spoiler alert, we have this Wagnerian opera of The Simpsons episode. And it's making the point that the things that we consider the source material for opera, the high culture, basically was the low culture of its own time. Mm-hmm. And this is what culture does. And, obviously Brokeback isn't low culture. It is a prestige film. It is a piece of literature. So it doesn't quite have that same association that we might apply to something like Jerry Springer or The Simpsons. But I think a lot of people would still kind of have that knee-jerk reaction. So I think right off the bat, my first thought about brilliant idea to do Brokeback as an opera, because of course it's a tragic love story that does belong in that same medium, even if at first blush it's about cowboys. They sing about Franks and beans and burnt toast and shooting coyotes. Like, it doesn't, there's a lot of stuff on the surface that makes it feel very unconducive to this form. So my feelings, and this is why I think there is a fruitful discussion to have about adaptation, that after I have engaged with the source material, I could probably be more intelligent about. I do think there is something very subversive to putting this piece in operatic form. And that's, even if this is not a very good version of that, as we all agree, I think it is worth encountering simply on those terms alone.
Yeah, wonderful. Carly?
Yeah, I also think that for me, opera is the only other way to tell the story besides like the short story and then maybe a film and then an opera. Solely because, similar to what Patrick said, like the old saying of like, when words fail, we have music, and because these are people who don't, share anything with anyone, because they're cowboys. Because they're cowboys, it gives an opportunity into their world. I also just think a play of this would be very boring. I don't think it would add anything, it would give us anything more. It wouldn't, because it's been told so well through these other mediums. The only other medium that I can understand it to come through in an interesting or different dynamic way would be opera. Though maybe we don't get that here, and that's fine. But I hear you, Ryan, though, with the like, I'm sure there's lots of people who are like, this is not opera, because we should not make this opera because it is not highbrow. But to those people, I don't care about those people. And I also like, and they're good, sure, yeah, whatever. But also, like you said, also Ryan, like opera in its original form, this classic opera is not highbrow. It's for everybody. Mm-hmm. The only thing that I could see being difficult is that opera is hard sometimes for modern audiences because of the attention it takes, because of the time it takes, because of so many, just obstacles as audience members going to opera who probably don't see a lot of opera, because opera is for those visual people of the world, though it's not, obviously. Mm-hmm. But that would be the only deterrent in my brain if I were somebody to say, hey, let's make Brokeback Mountain the opera, or let's make any modern opera for that matter. But opera has to, adapt or die, and it's adapting, and I think it's amazing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, opera is the only other answer here. Love it. Don't love this, but I do also love it.
Yeah,
trying something, isn't that nice? Shouldn't we all just try something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for me, this story is big and it's sweeping. We're spanning decades of time, and the setting is big. The characters, even though the two main ones are relatively silent people, are big. Like, their stories are big. Their Ennis's backstory about seeing the dead body is big. Mm-hmm. Like the whole conflict of, I want to take the ashes up the mountain. No, the son will be buried in the plot with the rest of us. I love you. I can't be with you. Like, The emotions are huge and generic. And ergo, opera is great for that. Opera is one of those things that doesn't need the specificity that, say, a Sondheim would. You know, like it's one of those things of it can be big, it can be grand, it can be lush, and also a little bit more on the generic side. That's why it works. I mean, the story of Madame Butterfly is a very basic story. Two people fall in love, one person leaves, one person has a kid, then they all get back together, they find out there's another woman, the other woman dies. The end. Like, magic flute. Somebody goes on an adventure for a magic flute, and there's a guy named Papageno, you know? And
great description.
Right?
Right?
As someone that was actually in the magic flute, yeah, absolutely. That's the perfect description.
Right? But I mean, that's it. Like it's big, but it's generic, and that's why it's worked for so long. I mean, how many freaking HMS Pinafores? I'm the mother of a modern major general. Right?
That's Pirates of Penzance.
I know, sorry, Pirates of Penzance.
Get your Gilbert
They
and
all
Sullivan
sound the
straight.
same. They all sound the same.
Operetta is important.
Yes. Anyway, so the whole thing is that it's big and it's generic and it works, and the story fits that mold. So if you were to come to me and say, "Hey, Mac, we want you to invest money in a new project. What's the project? Brokeback Mountain, the opera. Sign me up." I'm like, on paper, that sounds like a brilliant idea. The two actually mesh well together. Because, you know, it's like, okay, this actually makes sense. This should be done this way. I mean, I would even dare say something like an Oklahoma could almost be, because it's so early in the Broadway canon, is almost very operetta-like. I mean, once again, it's who's Laurie going to take to the fair? Oh no, it's Judd or is it Curly? Who's Ado and Annie going to marry? It's very basic and generic. It's not overly complex, as we'll get in later iterations of things. Like, if you want to hear more about our Oklahoma conversation, we did a whole review of Oklahoma.
That play broke me.
Hugh Jackman broke Ryan.
No, not Hugh Jackman, but the plot of that play broke my brain. You can watch that episode if you're curious.
It's true. But yeah, like that plot is very generic. You can tell Roger and Hipster was still learning how to make more complex things, right? And that's why it works. That's why people come back to it. That's why Brokeback Mountain does work as a concept. It's a beautiful love story, but it's generic enough that every audience member gets swept up in this emotion. So many people understand the whole idea of unrequited love. So many people understand the whole concept of, I didn't get to say the thing I wanted to say to you while you were alive, and now you're dead, and all I have left of you is 2 shirts. You know, very universal. And that's why the story works. And that's why the concept isn't bad. The execution, as we said, totally missed its mark, way off. But the concept is good. So, I mean, I would happily welcome another adaptation of this. Yes, Carly.
I have one quick little thing to say too. It's quick. Opera? Yeah. Gay cowboys?
Yeah.
Yeah. Put it together, camp sandwich.
But yeah,
exactly.
Like so much highbrow stuff is super gay. Also, like, have you ever read the Iliad?
Yes. Well, the
Very
Greeks and
central.
Romans were just so gay.
Well, they were much more
All
open
day.
as a society. They were full on accepting of that. They embraced it. Somehow we've gone the opposite direction as a society, and it's very sad. All right. Well, let's get into the last question, which is, Brokeback Mountain has long been considered a staple of the pro-LGBTQIA+ media. Given how much time has passed since its best-known versions, how do we feel this story has aged alongside the growing visibility of queer communities? Patrick.
Yeah, I love this question because I get to say my controversial opinions, which I love it. More relevant now than ever. I'm so bored of we need happy queer stories. We need happy queer stories. Like, some of us are angsty queers. And also, literally materially, we know that these positive representations have not been met with a decrease in violence experienced by LGBTQ people. In fact, we actually only see increasing violence against LGBTQ people. And so stories that interrogate the beautiful pain and the painful beauty of being gender and or sexual diverse are super important. And yeah, there's obviously there's the extant conversation is that we need like happy stories. Love Simon is incredible. And like, I'm happy there are happy stories and I understand the purpose happy stories serve. But I think it's really interesting and actually damaging the way we're now afraid to go into like sad or negative affect in relation to queer and trans stories. And so I love Brokeback Mountain as a story. I think Brokeback Mountain is an incredible meditation on the painfulness of sexual coming of age. And I think that, you know, there's actually, I can't believe I'm going to pull Zizek out, because Zizek is a kind of troll, straight Marxist cultural critic. And he says so many horrible things. But he said one really brilliant thing about basically like queer and trans stories and the ways that they circulate and what they do for us. And he's like, if the universality in queer and trans stories is they show us that it is painful to be a sexual and gendered being in the world. And like, that is what is actually universal. And like, that's an insight that we get. And Zizek's an idiot, but that's absolutely correct. And I love Brokeback Mountain because it offers that, an interrogation of the pain of sexuality, particularly under obviously systems of sexual regulation. But yeah, gorgeous story, more relevant now than ever. I want to kick Simon in his face. Bring back Ennis and Jack. But obviously, like, sad teens deserve Love Simon too. So, but
there we go, Carly.
Yeah, I'm into it. Give it to us. I didn't know you were asking for it, but here it is. Love it. Never gonna turn it down. Always gonna say yes. I also think it's really important to see period pieces that are queer. I think that's proved really important most recently with that incredible pirate TV show.
Our Flag Means Death.
Yes, Our Flag Means Death.
Okay, someone was tweeting about this
show
today, and but they were just kept calling it the Gay Pirate Show, and it was
it's the Gay Pirate Show.
And I was like, "What is this?"
Patrick, I will always know what gay pirate TV show you need to watch. I will always let you know. But yeah, so I think like the popularity of that proves that we're hungry for more period queer pieces. I mean, we get a lot of them. We usually get a lot of, like, you know, lady love, which is fine and cool. But, like, it's nice to have two, like, dudes on a mountain just herding sheep and then loving each other. That's, you know, sometimes that's life. And especially a period piece that's not so far period. It's not like a Victorian period piece, but it's like a current, you know, relatively modern, mid-century period setting, because, you know, I'm a big proponent and champion of you have to know where you've been to know where you're going. So yeah, we can't forget our queer history. So if we can have that in an opera form, okay, fine. You can have it in any form. Sign me up. You know.
Love it.
Also, angst. I'm into that, Patrick, too. We love it. A little bit.
Some of us are angsty.
Okay,
yeah.
It's all good. I think also the importance too is like, why can't we have everything?
Yeah.
All kinds of stories are important and good.
Yeah, exactly. Ryan?
Yeah, like I like what you just said there, Carly. Why can't we have everything? Because I think that's not to disagree with you, Patrick, but I think I like that we have a diversity of queer stories now. Because let's not forget that for a very long time, tragic romance was the only kind of romance queer like people could have in media. Like the only reason, like I mentioned how I knew that one of them died but didn't know which, but the only reason why I knew that is because when I saw Call Me By Your Name and then was like kind of engaging with the media discourse that came out around Call Me By Your Name, it was a big deal at the time that it was a gay romance that ended tragically, but not with one of them dying. Yes, and that, you know, that doesn't feel like that should be a big deal, but it was. And obviously Brokeback Mountain is the frame of reference I think a lot of people were bringing to that discussion of, yes, if Brokeback is this template of, oh no, we can't be together, one of us is going to die, it was nice to have this, like, you know, in my mind, very beautiful movie. Call Me By Your Name is a wonderful film that, is very touching, but didn't have to punish them for the sin of being gay, which I don't think that's what Brokeback is doing, but a lot of, the way we conceptualize these media and the message they send kind of does maybe fall into those traps. I like nowadays that cartoons are kind of leading the way in positive queer representation, as odd as that might sound.
Yeah.
Like, we have, like, in the past few years, like, we have Steven Universe, She-Ra, The Owl House. If you're not watching The Owl House, watch The Owl House. It's brilliant. We have so much post-closet queer media for children, which I think is great, because as hopefully we continue to progress as a society, we can, I don't believe we're there yet, but we can arrive at some kind of post-closet state where you can just be presented with all of the options at the beginning, choose whatever feels most natural to you, change your mind as you mature with age, not feel like I've defined myself as one thing and I have to commit to that, or that it's a big tragic rupture in my identity if I make one decision and then a different one later, or it can be fluid across the board. Yeah, I like that we have so many stories, and especially stories for children now, that are not framing it as a problem or even an eyebrow raise that these characters are queer. And I think that's important. And I do see that this progress is already happening. Like, so many of my students, like as a TA, are just, they're quite young and they are just already trans or non-binary. And the fact that, like, that, I knew one trans person when I was in high school, and that was very considered a big deal. Like, and, our parents knew none, if you think about that, or knowingly knew none. That's, I guess, an important point. But yeah. And to also touch on something, Carly, that you said about how, it's important to have these period pieces that touch on this, and, it's a lot more common for them to be lesbian stories. I don't know if any of you have seen, if you ever used to watch College Humor videos, but like maybe 15 years ago, there was a College Humor sketch called Lesbian Mountain, which was what if Brokeback Mountain was with two women, and it's probably very dated now. I remember thinking it was funny at the time. If you're watching this on YouTube, maybe we'll have the card here where we link to that, but or not. And I'm pointing at nothing. If we remember, but yes, it was the joke of that, and I think there is maybe some truth to this, but also could be in pretty poor taste from a certain other point of view. That if the plot of Brokeback was with two women, all of the homophobic men around them would be not disgusted, but titillated by their romance, and they would be encouraging them to kiss on the mountain and all that stuff. And then the kind of final punchline at the end of the sketch, spoilers for the sketch that you're probably paused this to go watch and then came back to, is that the sketch ends with they have a wedding, and then suddenly all those same men are like cross-armed. Well, that's gross. So like when they just see it as a sexual fetish object for their amusement, they're able to get behind it. But suddenly when they want the same, legal rights and privileges as anyone else, suddenly that's a problem. So yeah, like, again, this thing's like, 15, 17 years ago. Like, there's maybe things we can criticize about it, certainly. But I think it is interesting that Brokeback does present a very, I think, an important story about this male relationship that isn't just sexual. That the fact, I was actually surprised watching this, that how long a period the story spans, having not encountered the previous versions, that this is like a 20-year story. And I think for a lot of people, like, especially like, older, more conservative folks, this is probably their first encounter with an actual romantic same-sex relationship, that not just like, oh yeah, those two guys were doing naughty things on the mountain. And I think that's the image a lot of people probably have in their head when they encounter this text for the first time. So yeah, I'm not necessarily going to comment on how has Brokeback aged, but I think it certainly gets a grandfather clause for a lot of the stuff that we are seeing now and the new directions we're going in. And I can definitely agree, Patrick, with what you've said about maybe now more than ever, it is worth returning to this piece to have the diversity of stories that we can tell about queer people.
And I just want to say, I am happy for the children that there's positive representation. That
they get to watch Steven
This is why I kept saying, like, I get it. The kids need to not think they're going to die. But
yeah, exactly. I mean, once again, this story is still so relevant. I mean, the fact that in the past few weeks, we literally had a Southern preacher come out and say, we should line up everybody who's part of the LGBTQIA+ community against the wall and shoot them in the head, shows just how much we have not yet progressed as a society, that these restrictions and these barriers are still very much in place that this world is still exactly why Ennis wouldn't want to buy the ranch with Jack. That part of the story is still very relevant. So I think that's why Brokeback Mountain is a piece that is timeless, sadly, for the time being. Hopefully it won't be that, but for the right now, it's showing that this still is a timeless concept of repression. So I think that is fantastic that this piece still has merit and still has so much to say. And still is very important to the community. On the other side, though, the one part of the story I do think is a bit of a dated trope, which is the more outwardly non-heteronormative one of the pair, Jack, is the one who dies. Kind of like how in Rent, you have Angel, who is the one that dies, versus somebody like Collins, who is the more passing for straight heteronormative character of the piece. So I do think that is the one element of the story where I go, ooh, that's a little bit dated. That, of course, the one that's more out is the one that gets the death, So I do think that's the one part of the story that maybe I don't know how you would fix that in a modern adaptation. That was just the one element of the story I went, yeah, that definitely shows that it was written in the 90s when we were still learning about how to tell these stories. Because you think 1997, we'd had Falsettos, we'd had Angels in America, we'd had Rent. Like, those are kind of some of the big temple pieces that were out there. Because
at least in musical theater.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no.
Oh, and Angels in America. Yeah, and two of them are, but yes.
Yeah.
But if I can add, but also, like, Jack, who's the one that actually starts having, like, sex with more than just Ennis. Like, he's also, like, ends up putting himself more at risk for that reason, too. You know what I mean? So it's like, how, like, this safety that Ennis kind of brokers through the repression, the cost of that. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of, so it's almost like, not to be like, it has to be Jack who dies, but you have to come up with a reason for why Ennis would die due to homophobic violence when he so actively represses.
And I would also just agree, like, thematically, like, dramaturgically, like, it's Ennis's story. He can't die. We need to see him lose. Like, we need to see his, like, because he's so at the core, at the focus. If we lost him and just had Jack, it wouldn't be tethered to anything. Yeah. So,
like, I don't know. Like, maybe the alternate story is Jack goes off and does find a partner who's willing to be open and buy the ranch, and Ennis is left alone. And that's
don't let Annie Proulx hear you.
I don't know.
She doesn't want him to leave.
Yeah, I don't know.
Annie, cover your ears. Cover your ears, Annie.
Yeah.
But thanks for watching.
Once again, it's one of those plot points that, like, in the overall story, and once again, it's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful, tragic love story that for me, it breaks any bound. It breaks boundary. These cowboys could have been gay, could have been straight, didn't matter. It's a classic love story of two people who just miss each other.
It would have been worse if they were straight. We have enough straight cowboy stories.
Yes, exactly. Once again, it's the whole thing of this love story. Like, it's a beautiful, timeless love story of two people who just miss each other on the mountain. So there you go.
Just the word timeless that you've used a lot of times, I think, is interesting, because there's a line in it, and maybe this line is in the other iterations too, where, like, Jack's saying, like, it can be different, or things are getting better, and Ennis says it never changes here.
Yep.
And I think that's interesting, like, set in Wyoming, like, and then later Texas, but, like, timeless is such an interesting concept, because, like, we live in metropolitan Canada, where there's a lot has changed and improved, and but, like, I do wonder, does this story feel timeless partly because of the geography in which it's set, and do we, by reiterating this idea that things can never change in Wyoming or in the South or Middle America, are we kind of treating these places as a lost cause where we cannot actually, ever have, LGBTQ civil rights, like, in these places? Like, I'm not just saying that, Mac, you're wrong for saying it's timeless, or at least thus far, certainly in, and not just in those places. Obviously, there's homophobia and homophobic violence everywhere. But, I do wonder how much the setting is necessarily a contributing factor to the feeling of timeless, that the homophobia is as old as the mountain, if you will.
Mm. Yeah,
I mean, thoughts.
I mean, I think the setting is timeless because culturally, like once again, Wyoming and Texas, those are places that I don't think you'll see much cultural change because of the demographic makeup. Like, I mean, look at Wyoming alone. It is represented by Liz Cheney, who full on out condemned her own gay sister to win a House seat. Like, as much as we are applauding her right now for her work on the committee that she's on, she still condemned her own sister to win a House seat. Openly spoke out against her sister and her partner. So I mean, culturally, these you watch the interviews of these places, the change there would have to be so much greater. They have so much further to go than, say, metropolitan New York. Like the ground they have to cover to make up the cultural difference is so much greater. I think that's why the timeless quality is there, is because it's going to take a lot of time to make that to make the change. Sadly.
I think I would, because I don't think that I agree that the geography will read as for people as speaking to a kind of contemporary homophobia that something like Angels in America would be a great example. Would not. People would see Angels and would go, oh wow, that feels period in the way that you wouldn't see this kind of homophobia in New York or a metropolitan area today, which I mean I think we could also contest. But what I think is interesting actually about the geography is precisely that. I mean, as a cowboy movie, it's about the frontier, and so really it's there's actually some interesting academic work on Brokeback Mountain and questions of nation and settler colonial violence and all kinds of there's really interesting work. So I'm not saying anything new here, but I think for me, what makes that interesting then is that because it is the frontier, we shouldn't read it so much as the violence is fixed or locatable to this site, but the frontier is necessary to constitute the interior, right? And so this kind of fringe violence produces the interior. And so I love the geographic choice of the piece. I agree that, I mean, I don't think anything is timeless in the sense of marking a thing that is immutable or unchangeable. But I think there is something interesting about the question of the geography of the piece and how most people will at first read that, but maybe how we should actually read that. What is actually at stake in the frontier? At stake in the frontier is the constitution of the interior. And so, Wyoming's not the frontier in the way we might think of it now, but when we're making these kind of geographic maneuvers, it's really, it is actually about downtown Toronto. It is actually about, metropolitan areas. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
I would say that maybe it's not timeless, it's timely. It's still just as important and relevant and makes sense as it did when it was first, when it first went pen to paper. That it's held its timeliness, because I agree with Patrick, nothing is timeless because time isn't real, but also it's just I think it's maybe what we're all feeling is that it's timely, or at least that's what I'm feeling. But it's still just as timely.
And I want to add that I could imagine a world where homophobia is eradicated, and this story is still speaks to people, in the same way that Romeo and Juliet, people talk about the absurdity of the plot, right? But it's still, it gets at something in its absurdity, even though we can't imagine these 12-year-olds doing this in our day and age, And so I do think Brokeback could be timeless in that sense, in the way that I think we can imagine a world where homophobic violence is in itself unimaginable and absurd, and Brokeback still actually has something to say. But
I think it just that speaks to its universality then.
I guess there's an argument to be made here that the two main characters represent an idea of this homophobia is timeless, being Ennis's perspective, at least here, and Jack being this kind of voice of envisioning a greater horizon of progress, which is interesting because, like, even in the 60s, obviously this wouldn't have been a solution, but you could kind of see, like, oh, why didn't they just move to New York or San Francisco and then they could actually be together? But these are cowboys. They love ranching and bull riding, so that's not a solution for them. And I think Jack's perspective is that we shouldn't have to keep repressing and see our identities to please the community that will not accept us. Like, he's like, this doesn't have to be timeless. We might have a hard time, but it's worth fighting the good fight. And then you have Ennis, who's like, no, this will never change. We will just die in a ditch. So, you know, Wyoming belongs to the homophobes. And if we want to live in Wyoming because it suits the other parts of our lifestyle, we have to toe that line.
And on that note, let us conclude this Pride Month episode. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And we hope you have enjoyed this deep dive into this very iconic piece. And we hope that you will also check out this opera, because even though we may not have always recommended it, it is certainly an interesting piece just to give a watch and give it a try. Patrick, where can people find and follow you?
You can follow me on Instagram at postmodernpat. I've said it before, I am not a postmodernist. I just think it's a funny handle. And you can also find me on Twitter at PatrickMichaelT. Although I won't lie, my Twitter is basically just vague academic shitposting. So maybe don't follow my Twitter unless that interests you.
Awesome. Carly, where can people find and follow you? Where can we get tickets for your one-woman show?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram, just about everywhere, at Ms. Carly Billings. For show dates and things, you can follow us on Instagram and everywhere at Afterlife Theater. You just give us a wee Google and you'll figure it out. You're smart.
Exactly. Ryan, give us a classic Ryan Borochovitch send-off.
I'm not active on social media. It's not that classic.
It's so classic. You say it every episode.
Yeah, but if you like me, literally all I ever post on the one social media I kind of use, which is Facebook, is just these episodes when they go live. So just follow Cup of Hemlock. It's COH on all platforms, and you're not missing much.
There you go. You can follow me at Mackenzie Horner on all social media platforms. You can follow my other antics, which are more musically based, on Before the Downbeat, a musical podcast.
As opposed to opera based.
No, it's not opera based. We are going to do a Gilbert and Sullivan operetta in the near future, because Autumn does like those, and she did work for Canadian Opera Company, so she has a breadth of knowledge of opera. So we definitely will get into that for sure. But right now we've wrapped up our fourth season. We are currently in hiatus. We're taking a well-earned break. We'll be back later on, probably late summer, early fall at this point. So now it's the perfect time. If you haven't started listening yet, go back in. We got 4 seasons worth of musicals to cover. Our associate producer Jill appeared on our episode of Avenue Q, as well as she contributed to our episode all about Grease. So you can check those out as well. But in the meantime, everybody, stay healthy, stay safe, and we will see you all in our next episode. Thanks. Bye.